I mean, as you probably know, I was one of around 30, I think, maybe more of us, Labour MPs who didn't vote for Boris Johnson's deal. And, you will, I'm sure, have been aware of some of the debates that were going on at the time with the front bench and with cabinet ministers. We very strongly, those of us who thought it was a mistake to vote for the deal, made the case as to why we thought that was the case. Unfortunately, we lost that argument. And these were views that were shared. Again, it's been widely reported right up to the top of the cabinet. But in the end, the cabinet made its collective decision, and we are where we are. It doesn't mean to say, though, and one of the things one of the arguments that was made with those people, including people like Hilary Benn and Yvette Cooper and others who argued we should vote for the deal, was that wouldn't stop us criticising the deal. Now, I always had some scepticism about that. However, I think given that those were things that people said at the time, including actually the leadership in the PLP meetings we had to discuss it, it was quite clearly argued that by voting for the deal wouldn't stop us criticising elements of it and in the years ahead. So that has certainly given me free license as a backbencher to do so. And it's also very heartening to see people like Luke Pollard, who's the EFRA Shadow Secretary of State, covering fisheries, among other things, agriculture. Joe, who covers DCMS on musicians and artists, touring rights and so forth. Really going all guns in the Commons and outside in the media on some of the shortcomings of the deal. I think I gave a quote that was included in Sunday Before Last Observer piece, where I said that I fully understood Keir's reluctance up until now to talk about the deal. And I think probably that remains for some time to come. Those of you who are Labour members and activists who have been doing any of the telephone canvassing, many of us have been doing through dialogue, will know, and this is something that really quite surprised me, is that the public only really care about one thing at the moment, and that's COVID, and when they can go and see their family and go to the pub and go to Mallorca on holiday. But secondly, they give the government a huge degree of benefit of the doubt over their handling of COVID, although I'm sure most of us on this call think it's been absolutely appalling. But that's the fact. I mean, that is where the public mood is. And we shouldn't be surprised because, I mean, this is a political truism that in a major national emergency like this, there's a tendency for the public to want the government to succeed, and for us to be a constructive opposition. So while I don't have any criticisms yet of Keir's apparent reluctance to talk about the shortcomings of the Brexit deal, I don't think that position is sustainable once as we hope it does, the vaccination programme and everything else has its effect, and we can return to some sort of normality, which will include normality in our politics. And I bet we all look forward to that and getting out on the doorstep rather than just telephone canvassing people. But I also think it would be a mistake, as actually I think it's a mistake in a whole load of areas, to say what our Europe policy will be at the next election. I mean, it's never a good idea to announce all your policies at least 3 years before a general election, before you know where the lie of the land is, what the trade situation is going to be, the fiscal situation, and so forth. However, I hope that when things return to normal, or a semblance of normality in the months ahead, that we will not hold back from the top right down to holding the government to account over the obvious flaws in the Brexit deal. Now, people on this call will have a whole variety of different opinions as to what they think is realistic for us to offer at the next election. I mean, as probably one of the most ardent, strongest Remainers who voted against every sort of Brexit and was one of the leading lights for the People's Vote campaign, I'm afraid we have to recognise that Brexit has happened. So I'm not one of those. Even the Liberal Democrats are not going to be arguing that we should have a policy of rejoining the European Union in their next manifesto. I think probably my best hope is that as the negative impact of the deal and actually of Brexit itself, and the fact that there are these completely unresolvable tensions, whether you're talking about the union or trade and prosperity and so forth. My best hope is that sometime in the future we will join something that resembles the European Union. It's not going to be the European Union in its current form, because it is constantly changing. It has different speeds of integration. You have in an euro zone and an outer non-euro zone, maybe starting with moves towards EFTA. I mean, one of the arguments I've been making is that we should sign up to the European food hygiene rules, which would solve all of our fishing industry's problems pretty much overnight. And that would be a step, something that Norway it does, for example, not an EU member. That would be a step towards coming back closer to the single market and the customs union. So I think where the debate's likely to be over the next few years is not about rejoining the European Union, but it's going to be about renegotiating, improving the deal, moving towards a single market customs union relationship, which actually, if Theresa May had grasped, she would have had a majority for in Parliament. But it was something that she never, ever conceded to, because her right wing wouldn't let her. So that, in a summary, Mike, I hope that's helpful, is my current view on things. But I think we should keep our options open. And I think we need to be very fleet of foot to react and respond to events, and also the public's response to the events. At the moment, Brexit's not top of their agenda unless you happen to be yourself as an individual or business directly affected by it. But I think that will change, not least when people are allowed to travel to the rest of Europe again, and they suddenly find out that they're behind at the end of a very long queue behind the Russians. All sorts of ways it's going to impact on people's lives, which I think will change the nature of the debate here. And we will have to respond to it, whatever some people in the current leader's office would like. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ben. That was great. Really, really good to hear from you. So we'll next come across to Belle. We've got a couple of questions, I think, posted in the chat already, but if you do have questions, please do continue to post them, or save them up and you can ask them yourself a little bit later on. So Belle, we'll come to you, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to speak. Just say I'm really glad that a forum like this exists, because I think there are some people that are feeling, and said they're closer to the situation, feeling quite hopeless about what's happened. Ben's absolutely right. Brexit has happened, but Brexit, removing us from all of those prior relationships with the EU doesn't necessarily have to be the end. We had this whole, or the government had this whole rhetoric of asserting their independence in Brexit, and that's what Brexit was all about. But it's actually quite ridiculous. When we're making the deal, they're getting the deal together. Trade agreements between countries are not about one country's independence. They're about their relationship. And really what we need to be doing is working on our relationship with the EU. That's what the focus should have been. And I worry because, before we were, or the government rather, keep pointing to them, continuing to interpret what people meant when they voted for Brexit. Leaving the EU didn't necessarily mean that we should leave the single market, that we should abandon freedom of movement. There are so many other ways in which we could partner with the EU. Now, Ben again is absolutely right. Brexit is not the top of people's agenda, but as we roll out of the pandemic and certain deadlines start to loom, so for example, EU employees knowing that they have to register by a certain time, things will start to change, and people, it will very much come on people's radar, and things will become a massive issue. So at the moment we've got exports plummeting by 68%, 75% of vehicles arriving from the EU are returning empty. 2/3 of small businesses are seeing negative price changes, and the major one is we're seeing what the musicians are raising, and what we're seeing will come together when people have to regularize their status by June 2021. I'm really worried that research has shown that 1 in 7 EU employees are unaware that they have to do this. Now, in my own constituency, we have one of the largest EU populations, EU national populations in the country. I was really worried because when I first became an MP, there was some casework about settled status, and it's gone quiet all of a sudden. And I'm really concerned that coming up to that deadline, there will be a flurry. And then after the deadline, there will be people who find that they're shut out. And there have even been people that have suffered throughout the pandemic not being able to access services because people are confused about what has happened since we have left the EU. I also think it's very important to counter the misinformation that has been put out. So there was so much propaganda around the deal that people across the country now, and I honestly believe if you ask some people in 10 years' time, they will tell you that on that day in December, MPs went to Parliament to vote for the deal, but that's not what happened. When Boris Johnson retabled the withdrawal agreement, he actually removed the provisions that required the government to seek approval of its negotiating objectives and a commitment to a final vote. So we had no meaningful vote. All we had was an implementation bill, and actually within that implementation bill were a whole slew of Henry VIII powers, which meant that moving forward, the government can make, without consulting Parliament, major decisions on our relationship with the EU. So as a first point of call, I think one of the things that we need to really push for, other than highlighting all of the other issues and making clear where we stand on that, we need to push for a situation where those things are taken out and where democracy about our trading relationships with the EU, our most important trading partner, is actually brought back to members of Parliament. And I believe that if that happens, there'll be completely differing views on how we move forward with things. It's really, really important. It was a complete power grab of one of the most crucial issues of our time, and because of so much propaganda, we were able to miss what was actually happening, and people thought that MPs were voting on the deal. And I think it's important to point to people, yes, we have left the EU, absolutely, but as I said, our relationship with the EU now is as a trading partner, and agreements can be broken, agreements can be tweaked. All of these things can happen. It just requires the will to do that, and for the government to push on that. And I don't see why in certain cases the EU wouldn't be amenable to that fact. We just need to make sure that we are actually able to have these discussions. They're not being had behind closed doors, where our constituents can't influence us, and we then in turn, as is our job, can't influence the direction of this deal. So it's far from over. Again, it wasn't about our independence, it was about our continued relationship, and relationships can change. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Belle. That was really helpful. So we still don't have Will, so I'm going to come across to Clare Moody, who is a former MEP, and Clare is on the call, and I know we'll have useful things to say. I'm going to slightly put you on the spot, Clare, if you don't mind. And after that, we will come to questions. So just let me find Clare again. Here she is, and
I'm here.
Thank you so much, Clare. You're an absolute hero.
And it's a privilege to be a speaker alongside Belle and Ben, who have both been doing such brilliant work. And obviously I know Ben best as a Southwest friend, and I'm just so proud of the things that you have been doing in relation to this, and your articulate defence of our relationship with the European Union. And I will agree wholeheartedly with both Belle and Ben in terms of where we are. Belle's points are really important about the scrutiny of this deal, that we are, there is now no effective mechanism of scrutiny for what they could do with the incredible powers that they took in the act that went through in implementing the deal, and also in terms of the Partnership Council, that is the negotiating body now between the UK and the EU, which can itself amend the deal. So there's a whole committee structure that sits underneath the Partnership Council, and those committees, 11 of them are trade related. 7 of them are, or 9 of them are then separate specialized committees dealing with things like aerospace, etc. And then there are some working groups as well. And all of those, as I say, can make recommendations for changing the deal that we have. And there's no oversight of that. All the things that when I was in the European Parliament and we were negotiating the trading relationship with the US, all the things that people were campaigning about in that deal to oppose that deal, which the UK government wholeheartedly supported, the things in there, like the dispute settlement mechanism, which was seen as being anti-democratic, blimey, in relation to what we've got with the Partnership Council and what we've got with this government, it was a picture of democracy. It was a picture of voters having a say over things. So we have got that whole issue to focus on. The only thing I would add, because I think to what has already been said before we get to questions, is I think the David Frost development is really interesting. I could have foreseen a situation with Michael Gove and the Partnership Council, as he's done with the Joint Committee in terms of the implementation of the withdrawal agreement and the Irish Protocol. I will touch on that. They would have made this Partnership Council kind of work behind closed doors to deliver deals, to deliver something workable. In fact, they would have just tried very hard to keep it out of the headlines. In some senses, I think Johnson has done us a favour in appointing Frost, because I think Frost is caught up with his own ego. And I think he will want to be a headline. He will want to keep this in high profile. Now, the downside of that is he's going to want to keep it a fight. And we're going to see this over Northern Ireland. I think today Arlene Foster put her name to a legal challenge to the Northern Irish Protocol. The Ulster Unionists are fighting like cats in a sack in Northern Ireland. They've got elections and they are scrapping over a reduced number of votes. So yeah, this is about electoral survival as well as the actual principles of the Northern Irish Protocol. But they are, so we're going to have a lot of conflict around that. And I mean that in the political sense. I genuinely hope that won't be in any other sense, but that will stay high profile. Equally, we are not now going to see some backdoor workings out of what's happened in the culture sector, what's happening with fishing, and echo Ben's point as well about the work that Luke Pollard is doing around highlighting all of those, the issues around fishing and farming. So we are now at the beginning of the next stage, and the next stage has to be about people engaging in this issue and helping to inform the public and have the conversations. Europe used to happen behind closed doors where we were a member state. To some extent, a lot of what's gone on in the last 4.5 years has been about Westminster Parliament and still about British politics. We need to bring the British people into the conversation about Europe and how Europe works and how we have benefited from that. And Ben's spot on in terms of that is gradually going to become more apparent once we get through this COVID pandemic crisis, and when I sincerely hope we get to travel more regularly again, as well as the day-to-day issues of what's on supermarket shelves. So I'll leave it there, but delighted to join with Belle and Ben in answering questions.
Great, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. Just adding people here now. Thank you so much, Claire, for that. That was fascinating. So I'll just pass on apologies from Will Hutton, who I'm sure will join us another time. And we will get to questions just in a second when I can find Belle and Ade. There we go. Right, good. So if you do have questions, feel free to raise a hand, and then there are some in the chat as well. So the first one in the chat is about progressive alliance. So this is an idea which is often talked about, and it's perennially talked about when we lose elections. People, including Compass and many others, decide that we need a progressive alliance. And of course, what that means is different to different people. Some people want a kind of public pronouncement that we'll all work together. Some people want Labour to commit to PR so that the Greens or Lib Dems or whoever will stand down and allow Labour to win. Personally, I'm quite sceptical about the idea because I don't think you can order voters about and assume that if one candidate isn't there, then they'll go and vote somewhere else. Partly because of speaking to various candidates over the last few years. So there was one Labour candidate last year in 2019 I was speaking to, where I think there were 3,000 Green votes in 2017 in their seat. And lots of people were saying to her, you need to get the Greens to stand down and you can have all of those votes. And she said that they'd done a survey and found out that actually those votes would probably split fairly equally between Labour and the Conservatives. So you can't even assume that Greens are all going to vote Labour if there's no Green, never mind Lib Dems. So anyway, I've told you what I think. What do you guys think about Progressive Alliance? Has it got any, is there any way in which it is part of our future? Or actually, as the Labour Party, do we just need to recognise that we can win majorities because we have before and make a pitch for as many votes from as many parts of the country as possible?
I think we should. I think if I could step in there, I think progressive alliances is the wrong time to do it. You do progressive alliances after an election. I think at the moment we should be fighting that we're capable of winning elections and but we're happy to form coalitions if it's sensible after a result.
Great, thank you, Guy.
One thought.
Yeah, you're quite right. Belle, Ben, Claire, what do you guys think?
I think we need to be aware of the fact that the Lib Dems and the Greens alliance definitely hit us quite hard during the last election, and think very, very considerably about the fact that in those red wall seats, even in those red wall seats, the majority of the Labour voters there would have wanted to remain in the EU. And, when we do go back to appeal to them, we should be thinking about that also. But I agree. I really do think that progressive alliances are fought after an election. Great,
thank you, Ben.
I mean, I share Mike's skepticism about this, partly because it means different things to different people. I mean, in the 2019 general election, the Lib Dems and the Greens in Exeter ganged up against me and portrayed themselves as the anti-Brexit candidate, which is completely ridiculous because you couldn't have got more anti-Brexit than me. And in fact, the Lib Dem votes mainly came to me. I was the beneficiary of a ganged up non-progressive alliance against me. Look, I mean, yes, it makes much more sense after an election. However, I think that by the signals we give out as a party, particularly on issues like constitutional reform and electoral reform, some of you on this call may be involved in Labour for a New Democracy, which is the new sort of internal Labour campaign for a radical constitutional and democratic renewal and reform offer at the next election, including, many of us hope, something on electoral reform for Westminster. By doing that, we will attract potentially a lot of Green and Lib Dem votes. And what happened very successfully in the 97 and 2001 elections, for those of you who are old enough to remember, is that sort of messaging from the then Labour Party led to a sort of unspoken non-aggression pact in individual constituencies. It wasn't formalized, people didn't stand down candidates, but it led to a big surge in anti-Tory, very effective anti-Tory tactical voting, which benefited both us and the Lib Dems. I mean, the Greens weren't really a force then. So that would be my preference. But we may be forced into some sort of progressive alliance, of course, by the arithmetic after the next election. And I think if we've got something positive to say on electoral reform, that would be very helpful. I don't know whether you want me to deal with David's questions as well, Mike, now or in the next round.
Why don't you go ahead?
There were two Davids. One, David Taylor Goodby, I think. I completely agree with your analysis, by the way, that we didn't lose the election, even in the red wall seats, because of Brexit. I mean, any of you who are on the North doorstep will know exactly why we lost the 2019 general election to the extent that we did. I don't think we're going to be able to read very much into this May's local elections. They're going to happen in extraordinary circumstances. I mean, one would ordinarily expect us to do better than we did the last time they were fought, because we're in a much better position in the polls. However, I also suspect there may be a COVID bounce. I wouldn't have thought Europe would feature very highly in any of these. It may be an issue in Northern Ireland and Scotland, but not in the English local elections. The gradual versus the big bang join the customs union. Look, it may be that we can get to a position where we're arguing for a closer relationship to or membership of the customs union at the next election, because all of those issues that you put in the chat are ones that could be solved in one big bang by us being in the customs union. And yes, easier to do that than join EFTA. And David,
I've got to go to the other meeting.
Sorry, I can't hear you, Ben.
Yeah, he's on mute.
did you lose all of that?
No, we got most of it. We just lost
okay.
The sentences.
The final question was on, could I assure people that I and Bell and others won't be gagged? No, I can assure you there's no gagging going on. My last question to the Prime Minister at PMQs was on the plight of our fishermen and our artists and musicians. And I was on the conference call beforehand with Keir's PPS, Carolyn, and I told her exactly what I was going to ask, and she was very encouraging. So if other colleagues are being discouraged from asking PMQs about this issue, well, that's news to me, but I have no intention of shutting up.
Great, good to hear. Right, well, David, see if I've got his hand up.
Mike, can I come in on that? Just on the, firstly, to join Ben in plugging Labour for New Democracy, do sign up if you are able to. And secondly, I would say exactly the point about not being successful in advance of elections. Firstly, voters don't like being told by their politicians who to vote for, and they don't tend to respond to it that well. So it's not actually that successful, exactly the point that you made, Mike. But secondly, I've worked, the European Parliament, you do work cross-party. You don't get anything done if you don't work cross-party. I am used to working cross-party, and there are huge benefits to it. But we don't have the voting system to deliver cross-party working in the UK. So if you are in favour of that in any shape, size or form, then you need a different voting system than the one we've got. So that I would say is, I know Ben and Bell and others worked before the last election in Westminster on the various votes to ensure we got as close as we humanly could have done to a different outcome in terms of the relationship to the EU. But it's telling the voters you've got this choice isn't in my view a successful way of delivering that change. We need to campaign for constitutional reform.
I agree with you there wholeheartedly. Right, David Taylor-Gooper, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to come back. I live in Easington constituency. I mean, I call it Red Wall. We did hang on, but only just in the last election from having a majority of 18,000 at one time. And believe it or not, Easington Constituency Labour Party have now passed a resolution at my prompting to the government should rejoin the Erasmus programme. So this assumption that if you dare mention in Easington, I mean, we actually have a student from Durham University there who argued very cogently for it. No, but the idea that if you dare mention something like that in Easington, you get thrown out is just not true. I think, well, the reasons for the Red Wall are frequently talked about. I think a very big one is the sort of failure in most people's eyes of any sort of regional government. I know there are regional things there, but they don't mean much to people. The fact that decisions are sort of taken miles away. That's what came up in that study of the Red Wall, isn't it? That was done recently. That's all. I just wanted to add that. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, David. Right, Dan McCurry, you got your hand up. So I'll come to you for a question.
Oh, hi. So really a question for Ben. You said something that was interesting. Is most of what Labour MPs say these days is really depressing for me, because it's just like, just feels like the Parliamentary Labour Party is just taking orders from Boris Johnson or something. That's how it feels. But you said something really interesting, because I've been having a conversation with Mike about doing an event where we're going to talk about how do we persuade the Parliamentary Labour Party to maybe adopt a policy of rejoining the customs union, or at least putting up an opposition and highlighting all this chaos of Brexit, which the Daily Express actually reports, but the Labour Party some reason doesn't. You mentioned something there about fishing, and maybe Labour could argue blah blah blah. Do you mind just going over that again and just giving us a bit of detail? Because actually something very small would be a good thing for Keir Starmer to argue for, because if you argue something small and then get it, it's just a step on the way, isn't it? If you know what I mean.
Yeah. So yeah, and it's a very interesting question. I mean, of course, unless you're having a direct conversation with a Labour MP, as we are now, all you know about what we say is what is reported in the media. And going back to the point I made at the beginning of this whole session, it's really difficult for Keir to get cut through in the current situation. It's even more difficult for other shadow ministers and backbenchers like me to get cut through. But actually, if you were a real political nerd and anorak and sort of watched the Parliament channel all day long, you would know that a succession of shadow ministers, from Rachel Reeves through Luke Pollard, through Joe Stevens, responsible for all of the different sectors, you know, the city, the fact there's nothing on services, the Union, Northern Ireland, our Northern Ireland spokesperson, they have all been making a lot of noise about this and about Brexit in the House of Commons. It hasn't just been people like me and Bell. On fishing specifically, yeah, I mean, the thing that is causing the most grief to the fishing industry at the moment, we're talking here about the difficulties we're having in export, given that we export 80% of what we catch straight to the European Union, or used to, and shellfish in particular, is that we opted out. Boris Johnson and the Tory government deliberately decided to opt out of the European Union's food hygiene regulations, which Norway is part of. It has a big fishing industry. It's in its own interest, self-interest, to be part of it, although it's not part of the European Union. And if we signed up to those, this would also help agriculture, by the way, we would resolve a lot of these extra delays, paperwork, and cost issues in one fell swoop. So that was the simple suggestion that I made live on my regional BBC politics programme. I haven't heard it being made from our front bench at the moment, but these are the sorts of issues, whether you're talking about musicians or the City of London or whoever, any sector that's affected. I think we as an organisation within the Labour Party, and backbenchers like me and Bell, can make these cases and hopefully over time bring the front bench with us, so that we have, as I say, a more positive offer by the time of the next election.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's really interesting, and maybe we'll speak about that more later. I will say, but I'm enough of a political nerd, Ben, to know that the Labour Party was whipped into voting for Brexit without even knowing what the deal was quite recently. So, you know, it's annoying, but Mike.
Well, that's not strictly true. We were whipped into voting for the deal, which was presented. However, you know, I think Bell was the only member of the PLB who voted against it. I'm right in saying that, Bell. Now, the reason that she cut such a lonely figure in that vote is most of us who were unhappy voting for the deal felt that the logic of voting against it would be that, given that we were faced with literally a yes or a no, there weren't any amendments allowed or anything like that. The choice was voting for this, abstaining, or voting against it, which some people, I think, our enemies certainly, would have put in all of their literature that we basically voted for no deal. So, you know, you can pay your money and take your choice, but that's the judgment that those of us who didn't vote for the deal came to, most of us with the exception of Bell.
Can I just make one nerdy point on the fishing as well, which is that it was the UK government that banned bivalve mollusks being imported from third countries. So the UK government claiming that somehow they have been shafted by the EU in not being able to, for our shellfish to be exported to the EU is something they actually pushed for when we were an EU member state. So nerdy point, but deeply irritating that they know perfectly well what they're doing.
I think there've been many things like that. Yeah,
yeah, they have.
I mean, one question from me to all three of you is just about the customs union. So my thinking had been until recently that rejoining the customs union will be far easier than joining the single market, because much as we are either relaxed about or are keen for freedom of movement, of course, that comes with single market membership, and amongst some sections of the population that will not be a popular move. But the customs union doesn't have those downsides. However, I did an interview with a Conservative Remainer fairly recently, and he told me that, in fact, the Conservative Party are much more favourable towards a single market than they are the customs union, minus freedom of movement, and they don't want to rejoin the customs union because they do, some of them crazily believe that there are enough trade deals that we can put together with the rest of the world that would make up for or improve on EU membership, which of course isn't a fact, but nevertheless would make it very, very hard to get Conservative support. So I don't know what your views on that and whether rejoining the customs union is, a feasible short or medium term goal, or if you think that that the Tory dislike of that would make it a non-starter. I mean, obviously not until after the next election, but we're hoping that's a different world, right?
I don't understand. Well, see, I have difficulty comprehending the logic of Brexit overall, but the customs union, what was wrong with the customs union? And I remember that a meeting of political advisors, and I just remember one advisor shouting out when we were talking about politics many years ago, "What's wrong with the customs union?" At which point everybody burst out laughing, because it's true. I don't understand what the issue was there, and I see what you mean. It does make sense in terms of a medium goal, but with the Tories' position on it, that's very unlikely to happen.
Yeah,
I mean, Claire's the real expert on this, so I'll leave you the last word, Claire. But I mean, honestly, I think those Tory views will change in the months ahead when they see that these bold promises about fantastic trade deals with the rest of the world turn to dust. I also think the Biden administration, by the way, we haven't talked about, I think President Biden could really help with the dynamics over this, because we have a president in the White House who thinks Brexit's a terribly bad idea, as opposed to Trump, who thought it was a rather good idea. So, I mean, I voted repeatedly for the customs union. Actually, that's the closest we got to, remember when we had those interminable votes, I can't even remember what they were called now, they were sort of multiple choice votes. And the arithmetic of the House of Commons was such, and the tactics was such, that we were not always necessarily voting for the thing that we wanted most of all, but for the thing that we thought could persuade most of the waverers, either in the PLP or in the Tory party, to vote for it. And it was Ken Clarke's amendment on the customs union that I think got us to within 7 or 9 votes of actually winning something on a softer Brexit. So I'd be surprised if, I know the Tory party's changed since then, because they've chucked a lot of the decent, sensible people out, haven't they? And it's all full of headbangers now. But I'd be surprised if that remains a rigid position. If, as I suspect, we really begin to hurt from the consequences of being outside both the customs union and the single market. But Claire, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I would be surprised. Firstly, do not go to this government for putting the country's interests at heart before the party's interests, and anything that is pro-European, or brings us closer to Europe, is something that they will see as damaging to the party, will cause splits inside their party, and frankly, then, I mean, they are neuralgic about the EU. They can't see straight in relation to it. But the second point is also the consistency point. I mean, I can bawl for Britain about customs union and single market and the technical things that you get with it, and the idea that you could get the single market without freedom of movement is just not conceivable. But when you hear Gove talking about Scotland and the Union and all the arguments for Scotland staying with the Union, and you're thinking, that's what we were saying before 2016 about the EU. that's the level of hypocrisy and the lack of, well, I can't believe it's a complete lack of self-awareness. But the same, when they're talking about having a trade deal with the Trans-Pacific Trading Group, and all these arguments about the benefits of trade deals, and you're thinking, yeah, it's an iron law of trade that it halves for distance traveled. So when it comes to trade and customs union, then it makes literally no sense in terms of having that deal with the Trans-Pacific Trading Group, as opposed to having it with the EU. But this is not about logic, and this isn't about what is best for the country. So they are just going to keep running, desperately trying to somehow trash the EU and its reputation, whilst pretending everything's absolutely fine in every other quarter of the world.
Great, thank you. Terence Butler has his hand up, so Terence, we'll come to you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wanted to ask about the single market. Would it be possible to join and not have free movement? And another question is, free movement seems a very important thing. I mean, I used to have a neighbor and he was in construction. And when work dried up, he would go and work in Germany. And, I know firms where I live who have carried on a lot of business in Europe, the small firms, and they've been able to do that. Firms wanted to expand. The logical place is Europe. And if you're a small firm, it's easier. It's been easier because we've been in Europe. So are these things going to be taken up as well?
Thank you, Terence. Right, who would like to take that?
Just on the single market question again, and this was just after the Brexit vote. So a few months after, I went as a Labour political advisor with MPs to Brussels. I wasn't asking any questions myself. I was sitting in the background listening, and Barnier and other commissioners were very, very clear. They said there's absolutely no way they would allow us one of the four freedoms without the other. They said if they attempted to do that, what would stop other countries from attempting to do the same, or potentially wanting to leave the EU? They said it's not in their interests. Their interests are to protect the EU as it stands, and any sort of preferential treatment, even making it look like the UK got a good deal out of it, was not going to happen. And that was their bottom line back then. And I believe they'll continue on that track.
Yeah. Can I just add to what Belle just said, which is that's when there was still some kind of hope of what the relationship might look like with the UK. And, since then, I'm afraid, the EU is over us, properly over us. And they are not going to be, they weren't ever going to split the four freedoms, but they are certainly not going to be giving us any flexibility. Or when I say us, this government, this Johnson administration, with all that they have done, and I just give you the internal market bill and the deliberate intent of telling the EU, we will break your agreement, we will break international law. That in and of itself means they don't trust us. They do not trust this government, and they do not think we are a reliable actor. So the four principles stand as they are, the four freedoms, they go together and they are indivisible. But laid on top of that is no deal is going to be done with this administration because of the way it behaves. And Frost is going to keep doing that. Frost was part of the cause of that internal market bill, and he is going to keep damaging that relationship.
Yeah, but the country's about to be in a real crisis economically. And it'd be terrible if people aren't able to go to jobs, when they can't find them here.
Yeah,
I completely agree with that. Look, I'm a bit more optimistic that this is something we can push without talking about rejoining the single market. For example, if you follow the musicians and artists touring issue more closely, we rejected the EU's offer of a 6-month visa-free travel work permit in Europe because Priti Patel and the Tory government were neuralgic about that amounting to free movement of labour. It's not free movement of labour. That is ridiculous. So I think, once the different groups of sectors mount up, I think we can make an argument for changing this without going so far as to re-signing up to free movement, or as much as I would love to see it. I mean, the irony is, of course, that the public concern about immigration to this country has plummeted in the last 2 or 3 years, and we've also seen the biggest reduction in recent history of the UK's population as EU citizens return home, partly because of COVID, but also because of Brexit, at the same time as immigration from the rest of the world going up. So it's interesting where the public are, and I think they might be in a. This week's story is about the fact that all the daffodils are rotting in the fields in Cornwall because we haven't got anyone to pick them. We've lost the labour and we can't get the labour. So I think this is an issue where I'm certainly not going to stop speaking up, and I'm sure many of my colleagues won't. And I think we could make some progress, if not under this government, then under the next Labour one, I hope.
I think that's true.
And I just very quickly want to come in, because I know Will's joined us, but just to pick up on that point Ben made, is that let's not talk about these technical things. We all know what we're talking about when we're talking about single market. But actually, if we're talking about the 500 million daffodils in Cornwall and the daffodil pickers, talking about those fashion industry people that now can't get movement, the musicians that now can't get transfer, then we get to the end goal, but we get there because people have those stories in their heads, not because they've got a technical term in their heads.
You're right. It is about stories. Right. Good news. We've been joined by Will. So Will, we'll come to you for comments, and then we'll take a couple more questions at the end if we've got time to do that. So thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
An apology, but I messed up. But anyway, here I am. We're going on till 8 or till 8:15, or how long have I got? 1 minute, 3 minutes?
You've got, no, we said like 5 to 7 minutes. So we normally finish, but we take about an hour. So we normally finish about 8 o'clock.
Let me then speak. I'm for just 2 or 3 minutes. I mean, look, I don't know.
Go over for 5 or 10 minutes if we need to. So don't hold back. It's great to have you.
Well, look, I mean, I think I said, many of you might have read what I wrote yesterday in the Observer. I think that, I quite like Keir's speech. I didn't think it was a kind of the State of the Nation speech quite that it was billed as, but it had one capital omission, which I'm sure Ben has spoken about, cumulatively over the next 10 years, GDP will be cumulatively around 500 or 600 billion lower than it would otherwise have been. Tax revenues will be 150 billion less than it would have been. And trade will be cumulatively about 250 billion. And that sums to $1 trillion. And the pandemic's costing us $1 trillion. The banking crisis cost us $1 trillion. This country can't carry on taking £1 trillion hits like this. And over and above that, it's all very well, and I understand why he wants to do it. But if Keir wants to stand in front of the Union Jack, then he's got to do something purposeful to keep the saltire kind of in the Union Jack. And Labour in Scotland need to be the second biggest party after the SNP, best if they're the biggest party, but realistically the second biggest party. And if they're going to do that, you can talk about inequality and Marshall plans for economic recovery and a new constitutional settlement until the cow come home. But you must say something positive about the European Union, where the SNP has been given kind of the entire thing on a plate. And actually, I think things are fundamentally serious in Britain. I mean, in my adult life, the risk of the country breaking up has never been greater. And another £1 trillion hit is insupportable. The Labour Party, and all power to Ben for voting against the deal, and all power for him for keeping the flag flying, has got to speak out on this. It cannot be that we allow the terms of trade to be dictated to by the Brexit and the Tory party. I mean, I do not think that the ideological basis for this, even on the right, is that extensive. I don't think the people in the Tory party think that the idea that Ian Duncan Smith chairing the task force on regulation, growth and innovation knows anything about it whatsoever. I mean, hoots of laughter in Tory dining clubs that Ian Duncan Smith has been given this job. And nor do I think in the country at large is there, a huge constituency for Brexit. I think it's true that they don't want it to be talked about much. It's true that the way that everybody talks about it has got to be quite clever. And I think through stories like the Daffodil Pickers, or, and what's happening to the creative industries in Liverpool, or, wherever there are pinch points, when those stories get told, that may be a better way to get this out. But I mean, the top line is that the kind of sovereignty and regulatory autonomy which Johnson went for, excluding us from a single market and the customs union, is going to cost cumulatively $1 trillion. And sovereignty of that type sucks, and we should say so. And whether it be the environment, where I think there's a huge inflection moment on this. I mean, COP26 and the number of companies that are committed to sustainability and net zero, and it isn't just the governmental, it's actually companies owning it. Whether it be kind of a sense that it's society stupid that's front and center. These are European values. And so I think that, we can surely find a way of, in the Labour Party, kind of an internationalist party, talking about having been global Britain, yes, but from a European base, recognizing that the kinds of capitalism that we want to construct, the kinds of environment we need to build, are done best in concert with our European neighbors, and that we have made a capital error. I mean, maybe one has to go softly, catchy monkey at the beginning of this, but we should be under no doubt of where the heartbeat of the Labour Party sits. I've no doubt that the majority of the members kind of broadly agree, give or take what I've said. What we have to find is a way of getting, Keir to frankly be braver. I mean, his speech was fine on Thursday, and in many ways, points a good way forward. But some audaciousness, please. Some audacity, please. Some willing to kind of challenge an orthodoxy which I think has reached the end of its life. The willingness within that narrative to kind of cite Europe and being closer to the European mainstream as a target. So that's what I've got to say. I'm sorry, there's more to say, but I think that's enough for me.
That's great. Thank you so much, Will. Right. That was really helpful, as I knew that it would be. So Terence Butler has his hand up with a question.
Sorry, I'll take it down. I've already spoken, yeah.
Oh, okay, fair enough. No problem. Right. Has anybody else got questions that they want to ask Will or Claire or Ben or Belle? If not, I'll ask a couple of questions. If you have, feel free to raise a hand. In the meantime, one question for you all. How worried are you at the appointment of David Frost to his new role and the fact that he's replacing Gove?
Well, I think it's a challenge to the shadow cabinet. Are they going to have a shadow for David Frost? I nominate Ben Bradshaw.
I second that.
I want Ben on the front bench taking on Frost. And as he'll be in the House of Lords, maybe it has to be Andrew Adonis. But I mean, it's, in the months ahead, the UK EU partnership has to have, it's not just, Barnier to Frost ongoingly. or whoever replaces Barnier. It's also Parliament to European Parliament, and it's also civil society. And these things, the notion that this issue, cannot be talked about is just wrong. I also want, by the way, to the question in the chat about the OBR, I agree entirely. I mean, I think I'd like the European movement or Grassroots for Europe or one of the European kind of actors to actually do the work the OBR is not doing. We need to have a kind of, we need to start, all of you on the call are probably committed pro-Europeans, but I think very few people really get, even for me, actually, I'm still taken aback by it, the degree to which the UK economy is enmeshed with the European economy. And, coming out of the single market and the customs union, I mean, the story in the guidance running about Ventolin, the anti-asthma drug, which my eldest daughter has to take, having to move capacity to Holland. I mean, the intertwining, it's not just fish and creative industries, it's everything. It's architecture, it's law, it's high-tech manufacturing. It's wherever you look, the intertwining is profound. And unscrambling it is the cost is severe. And actually, it's not just the OBR's task. If they don't take it on, and there's no parliamentary committees going to take it on, then someone in civil society's got to do it.
I agree with that very, very much. I guess the question is who, and then the question is also, will it carry as much weight amongst the public as a government report? Ben, was that you?
Yeah, I think Claire gave a really good answer about what's his name? I can't remember his name now. The guy. Yeah. She which Will missed. She gave a very good, on the one hand this, on the one hand that answer. Can I answer another question that's in the chat, which is this idea that this is about Keir consolidating his leadership? I assume that means inside the party. I don't agree with that, because when the whip was agreed to vote for the deal, and when most of the PLP, not me or Bell, voted for the deal, I lost quite a lot of members, people who'd specifically joined the party to vote for Keir in the leadership election. And actually, a lot of the people who joined the party to vote for Keir and since did so because of his pro-European, anti-Brexit credentials. So I think this is more of a misjudgment about where the voters are, rather than about the internal, factions within the Labour Party. That's just a point to that point that was in the chat.
Yeah,
I would agree with you there, actually.
Mike, can I just come back in on David Frost briefly? But I think the important point of principle has now been established, that it is cabinet level. We have an EU minister, and the Labour Party has got to now, I think, mirror that, exactly as Will said. But the thing I am very worried about with David Frost is the thing that has been one of the biggest fears of many around our relationship with the EU, and it's Northern Ireland. And that he is so determined to keep stoking the conflict, as I've said earlier, the political, in this context, the political disagreements rather. But the consequences of that are very, very dangerous, and I am deeply concerned about that.
As am I. I mean, to be honest, one of my questions to you guys is going to be, do you think the protocol is sustainable? And I was going to ask you that even before Frost became appointed, but of course now he's there. My own view is that it's probably less sustainable than it was even before. But what do you guys think? Who would like to come in on that?
It's got to be sustainable. It is what is there. We don't have an alternative. It is there precisely because Johnson and his team chose such a hard Brexit. If we didn't have this hard a Brexit, we would not have the need for the protocol. But you start putting a border on the island of Ireland, then their consequences flow from that as well. And that is the alternative. So I'm afraid they've got to make this protocol work, because it's the best you can do. There isn't a magical technological solution that will take the necessity of the protocol away.
No, but I do think that Frost's appointment makes that a hell of a lot harder.
I think it's a well-made point, this, because I think that Michael Gove would have tried to keep that protocol alive, and I think in losing the battle is partly about Johnson's kind of enthusiasm for Frost's line, and maybe trying to kind of solve the issues by getting the EU to kind of back down from its position, which is impossible. So I'm very fearful about this. I agree with Claire.
Yeah, me too. Right, we've got 4 questions from members. So David, we'll come to you. We'll take these questions and then we'll finish up because we're slightly over time already. But David Taylor-Gooby, go ahead. You're on mute. Classic.
Listening to all the speakers, I seem to have a sort of coherent idea of where we're all going now, is that we pick up on every pinch point, every failure that comes because of Brexit, whether it's even just things like, as it was in your paper, Will, about Holyhead going out of business because people are going different ways around, you know. And we make a big noise about this. We're not saying we got to rejoin the EU. We deal with each issue at a time. And then we wake up one morning and find we're 90% there. So is everybody sort of, is that roughly where you all think we're going? You're nodding, Ben. I don't know where the others are. Okay, that's all.
Thank you.
Ben, I don't know. I'm not having to speak, but I don't know where Ben wants to speak. And where is Ben?
I thought we were taking all 4 questions and then coming back at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll do that. That's a great idea. Right, Graham.
I think we'll agree that there's going to be some very bad economic consequences, but how, at the moment, are they going to manifest themselves? So it seems paradoxical that the pound is doing rather well at the moment. But are we going to get a long decline of the pound? Are we going to go back to the sort of balance of payments crisis that we had in the Wilson years? What is the most likely outcome at the moment?
Great, thank you, Graham. Right, Guy.
Actually, Graham's just asked my question, which was going to be about the future of export and the balance of payments. So I'll put my hand down. So.
Okay, great. And then Colin.
A very quick observation about Will's observer piece. I mean, the last 3 words, punchline, was "It's Europe stupid," wasn't it? That's just about what needed to be said, I think. Not that we think believe the Labour Party is stupid, but it's the right message to put across at this point, I think, or corrective. Just a question about Frost. There's another criminological hypothesis, which is that he's been put in there as the fall guy because he owns the previous failure. There's more failure to come because they won't make much headway. They'll either cause a disaster or they will have to back down. And he's a good guy to own the humiliation of that before being terminated by his party. Gove stepped back to stay away from the messy stuff. Just a question.
Great, thank you, Colin. Right, we'll come to each of you. So we've got questions on building up bit by bit until we're close to EU membership again. Obviously on the pound, balance of payments. It's Europe stupid, as in this is the way for Labour to take chunks off the government, and then the possibility of Frost being a fall guy. So we'll come to each in turn to answer those questions and then give final comments. So Ben, can we come to you first? And don't feel free to answer.
Yeah. No, I won't answer all the questions. Don't worry, Mike. In fact, I'll leave the economic consequences to Will and Claire, who are much better qualified to answer those. And I in the criminology of David Frost is also beyond me, I'm afraid. Although I've read that theory myself somewhere in the last 48 hours. But to answer David's question, which was the first of them about this sort of highlighting every single problem as we go along, I think that is the right strategy for the time being, to feed the view that I think is growing out there. I mean, who would have ever imagined hearing fishermen 6 months ago saying they wish they voted Remain and feel betrayed by the government? And that will become a sector by sector experience, I suspect, as the months go ahead. But sooner or later, we're going to be asked in TV and radio studios, as we already are actually by some people, well, what would you do? How would you renegotiate? What would you do differently? So I think that's the policy that will sustain us, for the moment. But I do think, and this is one of the things that I'm not sure we've worked out yet, which is what is our Europe policy going to be at the next election and between now and the next election? That's a simple question. If you ever get the opportunity to, in a Q&A with Rachel Reeves or Keir or Emily or any of them, Lisa, just ask that simple question. I'd be very interested to hear what they say.
Yeah. Thank you. So, Belle, could we come to you, please?
What I would say is I do agree. We've just got to highlight them as they come, and actually only because that's the way it's going to happen. I think it was Will was talking earlier about the unraveling. Because of the unraveling, a lot of things are going to take time to expose themselves, and also because of the pandemic, you won't be able to see certain things until we are actually able to move freely, and more businesses start to interact a bit more. Then we're going to see the real effects, and it's about pointing them out every single opportunity. I'm particularly worried about the effects on immigration. Again, something that's not going to happen until June this year. Personally, I think it should be extended because of everything that has happened, because it can have a massive impact on our public sector. And I think potentially because of the massive impact it could have and how people may be left, this may be one of the main opportunities to point out what the issues are with the deal as it stands. In terms of Frost's appointment, shocking, but at least, or I hope this means that I'll be able to get some of my parliamentary questions answered, because so far they're being knocked back from the Foreign Office and to do and other departments on the basis that I'm asking questions about Brexit, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Great, thank you, Belle. We'll come to you, and then we'll come to you, Claire, and then we'll finish up.
A comment on Keir and then the economic stuff. I mean, I think there's two things really going on in the in that team around the leader and in the leader's head. I mean, one is the British public may be moving, but they just don't want to hear about Brexit. I mean, they just don't want to hear about it, and there's no way that I can talk about it without being jumped on by Johnson as there you go. You want another referendum and put us through all that pain, and I think he kind of jibs at that, and he's still reeling from the fact that the Labour Party has got fewer seats in the House of Commons any time since 1935, and that there's consequences, as he keeps telling everyone, for losing elections, and what a high price we paid for 2015 to 2019. My view is that this is inescapable, and he has to talk about it for the reasons I've set out. I'm smart about the way you talk about it, and I think some of the ways that people have said in the call sound right to me. Picking up kind of areas where it's going wrong, and it being told actually through stories of actual human beings. Will there be an economic crisis? Look, over the next 4 years, Britain's going to run a current account deficit, and that is visible exports and what's called invisibles in the jargon. That's what creative industries and architects and the City of London earn, as well as interest and dividends from abroad, and us paying those out, and us getting some in, which relates to inward investment. And the current account deficit is, for 4 consecutive years, the OBR says, going to be 5% of GDP. You can't find a period in recent economic history where we've run such a big current account deficit without there being difficulties. And usually the reason we obviate the difficulties is because you have a lot of inward investment coming into Britain. We have been for some years now the second biggest destination for inward investment after the United States in the world, incredibly. and it's to use us as an aircraft carrier to kind of export into Europe. Inward investment has fallen off a cliff. Inward investment is running at levels that are, I mean, paltry compared with where they're running in 2015. I mean, it's extraordinary. Look at the numbers. And so a major item to kind of balance the current account deficit has fallen away. If export volumes fall by the degree that they seem to have fallen in January, and if that follows through, and that's not certain, by the way, there will come and we carry on borrowing at the current levels with no plan to curtail borrowing and no way of trading out of having an enormous, an ongoing and ballooning current account deficit. No one on this call can exclude there being a run on the pound. At the moment, it's being buoyed up by, the immediate prospect is for a vaccine bounce in the economy and really quite strong economic growth in the second half of the year and into the first half of next year. And the markets are kind of all excited about that. But beyond that, it gets very difficult. And again, when you take a £1 trillion hit of the type I've been discussing, from such a weak economic position, and where there could be pressure in Scotland to have an independence referendum and how the policy of that plays out, who would be a foreign creditor of the UK? And what I want to say to you all, and what I try to say to Keir when I get an opportunity to speak to him, is that I don't think, the profundity of what's happening is really kind of, we're being gaslighted by the government. Yeah. The opposition is terrified of saying boo to a goose for the reasons I've outlined. But actually, the scale of economic difficulties, the unwinding of our relationship with Europe, the precariousness of the national economy, the integrity of us as a nation state, for these things to happen simultaneously is, it's rank, and it's rank bad politics that's landed us in this position. And actually, getting out of it could be enormously problematic. And we start by encouraging the leadership of the Labour Party to actually, come to terms with the fact that if you're the opposition party at such a conjuncture in our national affairs, to stay mute is close to criminal. Yeah, that's my view.
Great, thank you, Will. Very glad. Honestly, thank you so much for joining us. And finally, last but very much not least, we'll come to you, Claire.
Thank you. Kind of follow that. I certainly don't intend to on the economics. And I would also like to say Will's columns are a highlight of every week as well. So it's pleasure being on the same panel. On the Frost point, no, he is not there as the fall guy for this. He is there because Johnson wants to keep the Brexit culture wars going, and he sees Frost as part and parcel of doing that. He is not there to solve the problems we are seeing. He is there, in a sense, to keep the pot boiling. I remember a while back, 2016, somebody saying to me, a Tory politician who I knew in the European Parliament, saying to me that Theresa May was going to be the savior of all our problems, and that she was there to kind of get us through all of this, and then she'd kind of make sure we didn't leave the European Union. Yeah, well, that went well. So I certainly don't think this is some kind of brilliant scheme to make them hold the baby, because let's not forget Johnson is sitting at the top of this structure, and it's his baby more than anyone else's. So Frost isn't going to be taking the fall for that. As I said, I think Will has more than admirably addressed all of the points around the economic questions, and indeed his earlier point about picking up some of the work that isn't being done in relation to these consequences. So on the softly, we get back there. I think that is the way forward. I think that is how we do this. And I would say two things in particular. One is, the Brixham fisherman has already been mentioned around his change of heart. And he was an ardent Brexiteer. He was absolutely advocating that we should leave the EU for the sake of the fishing industry. And the fact that he is now, his name, Payne, I think his name, but the fact that he has now changed his position, I think is really important. And he isn't going to be the only one. He certainly isn't the only one. Now, it's really important how we respond to that, because a lot of people have gone, oh, look at you fishermen. Well, you voted for it. You deserve what you get. We now have to think of him and his fellow fishers and anyone else who has done that journey. They are now our allies, and we have to treat them as our allies, because they are going to be our best advocates for a different relationship with the EU than the one was being forced upon us right now. So let's God loves a convert. Let's embrace our new fellow travelers and not condemn them and therefore alienate them. We need to keep them on side. And the second thing is 2024. If we have to wait till 2024 for an election, I suspect we won't, but I think we're more likely 2023. If it is 2024, then the whole deal is up for renegotiation in 2025. You can't ignore that because the negotiations start a year earlier. So, this is very much as if it weren't, with all the sore points that are going on and will continue to go on. It will be a living issue at that point in the electoral cycle. And finally, what I'd say is that we all were stunned, and some of us, not all of us, and certainly not everyone on this call, but stunned into silence after the referendum result. The other side picked up the ball and ran with it while we were completely failing to perform any strength of defense. And that has to change. We now have to be as opportunistic as they were in terms of our campaigning. They did this over 20 years. I think we could, I would like to think that we could at least get, a better resolution to the relationship. And dear God, I hope at some point getting back into the European Union. But we do that by, picking up on the fishing industry and the points that Belle, Ben and Will have made about, we have to oppose. We have to stand up for the British people who have been royally screwed by what's happened now. And consequently, we have to make a defense of their future through that changing of the relationship with the EU in the future. Thank you.
Brilliant. Great. Claire, Belle, Ben, Will, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you to everybody else for your questions and for taking part. Great to see you all. We are back on Wednesday for an event with Catherine West. Details of that are on our Facebook page. And then we'll be back 2 weeks today, I think, for the next Monday webinar. Thanks again to speakers and thanks to everybody else. And we will leave it there.